"I'll see you in court, Parker." My wife Vera said those words with a satisfaction that chilled me to the bone, demanding $200,000 for 3 kids while she was secretly living in her millionaire boyfriend's apartment. She thought she had it all figured out, the affair hidden, the finances calculated, the judge already sympathetic to the crying wife. But what Vera didn't know was that I'd hired the best private investigator in Charlotte, and what he uncovered wasn't just proof of her betrayal. It was evidence that would shatter everything she thought she knew about our family. What happened in that courtroom will make you realize that some secrets are too explosive to stay buried. Viewers, if you found out your spouse had been lying about something fundamental for years, would you expose it or keep it hidden to protect your children? Let me know below. Before this story begins, subscribe. You'll never look at relationships the same way again. My name is Parker Werner. I'm 41 years old, a senior software architect at a fintech company here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've spent the last 15 years building what I thought was a comfortable life, a 4-bedroom house in Myers Park, 2 cars in the driveway, and what I believed was a solid marriage to my wife, Vera. We have 3 kids, Emma, who just turned 13, Marcus, who's 9, and little Sophie, who's 6. Or at least, that's what I believed until that Thursday evening in October when Vera handed me divorce papers across the dinner table like she was passing the salt. I remember staring at those documents, my heart hammering in my chest. The kids were upstairs doing homework. I could hear Emma's violin scales drifting down from her room. The sound that usually brought me peace now felt like a funeral dirge. Vera sat across from me, her arms crossed, her face cold and distant. A look I'd seen more and more over the past 2 years but had convinced myself was just stress from her real estate career. The amber light from the desk lamp cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look like a stranger. $200,000? I said, my voice barely steady. You're demanding $200,000 in child support? Vera, that's insane. She didn't blink. Those green eyes that I'd once found so captivating now looked at me with something close to contempt. That's what 3 children cost, Parker. If you want to see them regularly, you'll pay what they're worth. My lawyer says I have an airtight case. Her voice was mechanical, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation in the mirror. I thought back to when we first met at a mutual friend's barbecue 12 years ago. She'd been magnetic, gorgeous, ambitious, with this infectious laugh that made everyone in the room turn and look. I was a mid-level developer back then, awkward at social events, and I couldn't believe someone like her was interested in me. We married within 18 months. Emma came a year later. I thought I'd won the lottery. But sitting there looking at the woman I'd built a life with, I realized I'd never really known her at all. She'd always been performing, always calculating. I just didn't see it until it was too late. "I'll see you in court," Vera said, standing up. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound that made me wince. As she walked away, I noticed something in her expression. Not anger, not sadness. It was satisfaction. Like she'd been planning this moment for a very long time. Her heels clicked against the floor with military precision as she disappeared into the hallway, leaving me alone with the papers and the sound of my children living their innocent lives upstairs, completely unaware that their world was about to shatter. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I kept replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for the signs I'd missed. By Saturday morning, I was sitting in the office of Marcus Holloway, a private investigator whose name I'd gotten from a colleague who'd gone through his own divorce nightmare. The office was in a strip mall off Independence Boulevard, wedged between a bail bondsman and a tax preparation service. Rain streaked the windows, and the fluorescent lighting gave everything a greenish, institutional tint that made my headache worse. Marcus was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of tired eyes that had seen too many broken families. File folders were stacked on his desk like a paper fortress. He poured himself coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration and studied me over the rim of his mug. $200,000 is excessive even by North Carolina standards, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair until it creaked. Unless she's got something on you, she's overplaying her hand. Which means she's either desperate or she knows something you don't. There's nothing to know, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt the lie in them. I've been a model father. I work from home 3 days a week so I can be there for the kids. I've never missed a recital, a game, a parent-teacher conference. Marcus studied me for a long moment. Mr. Werner, in my experience, when someone asks for a number like that, they're either hiding something or they're trying to punish you for something. Which is it? The truth was Vera and I hadn't been intimate in nearly 8 months. She'd been spending more time at what she called networking events and open houses, sometimes not coming home until midnight or later. She'd started dressing differently, More expensive clothes, designer labels I knew we couldn't afford on our combined income. There was a new perfume too, something musky and expensive that I didn't recognize. When I'd asked about it, she'd snapped at me, her eyes flashing with an anger that seemed disproportionate to the question. She'd called me controlling, said I was suffocating her. I'd backed off, told myself I was being paranoid. Work had been demanding with the company going through a merger. Maybe we just needed to reconnect. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to see it. Marcus pulled out a contract and slid it across the desk. I'll need a retainer. $5,000 to start. And Mr. Werner? Whatever I find, you need to be prepared for it. Sometimes the truth is worse than the suspicion. I signed the contract with a shaking hand. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. A text from Vera. The kids want to know why you're being so difficult. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The manipulation had already begun. Marcus worked fast. 5 days later, he called me to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in South Park, far enough from my neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I arrived early, ordered a black coffee I couldn't drink, and waited. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, creating pools of golden light on the dark wooden tables. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life from outside my body. When Marcus sat down, he didn't make small talk. He just slid a manila envelope across the table, the movement deliberate and slow. Open it, he said, his voice flat. Inside were photographs. Vera at an upscale restaurant in uptown Charlotte, the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance. Vera at a hotel bar, leaning close to someone, her hand on his arm. Vera entering a luxury apartment building in Dilworth, looking over her shoulder like she was checking if anyone was watching. And in every photo, she wasn't alone. The man with her was younger, maybe mid-30s, fit, with slick back hair and expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. His name is Damien Cross, Marcus said, watching my reaction carefully. Commercial real estate developer. Worth about $8 million, give or take. They've been seeing each other for at least 14 months, possibly longer. The apartment in Dilworth? He pays for it. Monthly rent is $4,500. She's been using it 3, sometimes 4 times a week. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. 14 months. While I'd been picking up Sophie from gymnastics and helping Marcus with his science projects, reading bedtime stories and packing lunches, Vera had been building an entire separate life. I thought back to about a year and a half ago when Vera started insisting we needed space to grow individually. She joined a yoga studio, started going to a personal trainer, took weekend trips to Asheville and Charleston to decompress. I'd encouraged it. I thought I was being a supportive husband, giving her room to breathe. I'd even taken over more of the childcare duties so she could have her freedom. God, I'd been such a fool. There's more, Marcus said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. He glanced around the coffee shop like someone might be listening. The $200,000 she's asking for? Damien's been promising to leave his wife for her, but he won't. He's got too much to lose in a divorce. Prenup would cut him down to nothing. She needs you to fund her exit strategy so she can maintain her lifestyle while she waits for him to make a move that's never going to happen. I stared at the photographs, my hands trembling so badly I had to set my coffee cup down. What else did you find? Marcus hesitated, and that scared me more than anything else had. Mr. Werner, there's something about the children. I need you to sit down for this next part. I noticed something when I was surveilling your wife, Marcus said carefully, pulling out another folder. Little Sophie, she doesn't look much like you. Or your wife for that matter. Different eye color, different bone structure. So I did some digging into medical records, school enrollment forms, anything public. There were some inconsistencies in the timeline. My blood ran cold. The coffee shop noise faded to a dull hum. What are you saying? I'm saying you should get a paternity test. For all 3 kids. Just to be sure. He slid a business card across the table. This lab is discreet. They can do it with cheek swabs. Results in 72 hours. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to storm out and pretend this conversation never happened. But instead, I sat there, frozen, because somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice had been whispering the same thing for years. Sophie had been a surprise pregnancy. Vera had told me she'd gone off birth control without telling me because she wanted one more baby before she turned 35. I'd been thrilled, thought it was romantic. But Sophie's birth had been different from the others. Vera had been distant during the pregnancy, almost resentful. She'd made comments about how another child would ruin her career momentum, how she was finally getting traction in real estate and this would set her back years. When Sophie was born, Vera barely wanted to hold her. I'd convinced myself it was postpartum depression, that it would pass. I'd taken paternity leave, done the night feedings, changed every diaper. Sophie and I had bonded in a way that felt different, deeper somehow. Now I understood why. I'd been compensating for Vera's rejection of her own child. 2 weeks later, I sat in my car in an empty parking lot, staring at a sealed envelope from the lab. I'd driven to a park across town where no one would see me fall apart. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed obscenely beautiful given what I was about to learn. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope. Emma, 99.9% probability of paternity. Marcus, 99.9% probability of paternity. Sophie, 0% probability of paternity. The world tilted. I couldn't breathe. My 6-year-old daughter, the little girl who called me daddy and drew me pictures of us holding hands and insisted I read her 3 stories every night, she wasn't mine. Biologically, at least. But in every way that mattered, she was my daughter. I'd been there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten. I'd held her through nightmares and wiped away tears and taught her to ride a bike. I sat there until dark, crying in my car like a broken man. The test results crumpled in my fist. Then my phone rang. It was my lawyer, David Chin. Parker, we need to talk. Vera's attorney just filed an emergency motion to restrict your access to the children. The hearing is Monday. They're claiming you're emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. That Monday morning, I walked into the Mecklenburg County Courthouse feeling like I was heading to my own execution. The building was imposing, all concrete and glass, designed to intimidate. Harsh morning light streamed through tall windows, creating long shadows across the marble floors. My footsteps echoed in the corridor as I walked, each step feeling heavier than the last. Vera stood at the far end of the hallway with her lawyer, Patricia Drummond, a woman who'd built her career destroying fathers in family court. She had a reputation for being ruthless, for playing dirty when necessary. Vera looked immaculate in a navy dress, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look vulnerable and sympathetic. She was playing the role of the concerned, protective mother perfectly. She wouldn't even look at me, just dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while Patricia whispered in her ear. My lawyer, David Chin, was younger but sharp. He'd reviewed everything Marcus had found, the affair, the photographs, the financial records, the paternity results. The affair works in our favor, he told me over the weekend. The paternity issue complicates things, but we can use it. The question is, Parker, how far are you willing to go? Because if we bring this up in court, there's no going back. Sophie will eventually know. Everyone will know. I'd thought about that all weekend, barely sleeping, playing out scenarios in my head. Sophie wasn't biologically mine, but I was the only father she'd ever known. Emma and Marcus were mine by blood and by love. This wasn't just about money or revenge or even justice. This was about protecting my children from their mother's manipulation and lies. David had been honest with me from the beginning. Family court is biased toward mothers in North Carolina, he'd said during our first meeting. Even with evidence of infidelity, even with financial manipulation, you're fighting an uphill battle. Judges see fathers as paychecks and mothers as caregivers, even when the evidence says otherwise. Unless you have something nuclear, something that proves she's an unfit parent, you're looking at standard custody and probably substantial support payments. I'd asked him to define nuclear. He'd looked me dead in the eye and said, evidence that she's putting the children at risk. Neglect. Endangerment. Something the judge can't ignore, can't explain away. I hadn't had that evidence. Until Marcus made one more discovery last Friday, something he'd found in Vera's cell phone records that changed everything. We entered the courtroom. Judge Margaret Thornton presided, a woman in her early 60s known for being fair but strict. As we took our seats, Patricia Drummond stood, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. Your Honor, Mrs. Werner is seeking full custody and $200,000 annually in child support. Mr. Werner has a history of controlling behavior and emotional outbursts. Patricia Drummond came at me like a predator circling wounded prey. She painted me as a controlling, emotionally absent husband who'd neglected his wife and was now trying to punish her for wanting a divorce. She showed the court my work travel records from 3 years ago, trips I'd taken for conferences and client meetings in Boston, San Francisco, and Seattle. She framed them as abandonment, as choosing my career over my family, her voice rising with righteous indignation. Mr. Werner, isn't it true that you've prioritized your career over your family? She asked, standing close to the witness stand, invading my space deliberately. No, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. I worked hard to provide for my family. I also coached Marcus's soccer team for 3 years, attended every one of Emma's violin recitals, and spent every evening I was home putting Sophie to bed. I read to her every single night. But you weren't always home, were you? Patricia pressed, a slight smile playing at her lips. David objected, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air, that I was an absent father, that my children barely knew me. Vera sat at her table, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking slightly. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I could see the judge watching her with sympathy and my heart sank. Then it was David's turn. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "Mrs. Werner," he began when Vera took the stand, her voice small and trembling as she was sworn in. "Can you tell the court about your relationship with Damien Cross?" The color drained from Vera's face instantly. Her carefully constructed mask cracked. Patricia objected immediately, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant to custody matters." But Judge Thornton overruled it. "I'll allow it." "Answer the question, Mrs. Werner." "He's a colleague. A professional contact in commercial real estate," Vera said, but her voice wavered. She glanced at Patricia, seeking help. David pulled out the photographs Marcus had taken, approaching the bench. "A professional contact you've been intimate with for over 14 months? A professional contact whose luxury apartment in Dilworth you visit 3 to 4 times weekly while your husband cares for your children?" He handed the photographs to the judge, then to Patricia, who went rigid as she flipped through them. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Thornton banged her gavel, calling for order, but I could see her expression had changed. This wasn't just about an unhappy marriage anymore. "Your Honor," David continued, "I'd like to enter into evidence phone records, hotel receipts, and witness testimonies documenting Mrs. Werner's extended absences from the family home over the past 14 months. More concerning, however, is what those absences meant for the children." He paused for effect, letting the tension build. Specifically, incidents where Sophie Werner, age 6, was left alone in the family home for over 2 hours on 3 separate occasions while Mrs. Werner was otherwise engaged with Mr. Cross. Vera's lawyer shot to her feet, her face flushed. "Your Honor, these are baseless accusations without proper verification." But I could hear the panic in her voice. She knew what was coming, could sense the tide turning against her client. Judge Thornton's expression had hardened into something cold and judicial. "I'll hear the evidence, Counselor." "Mr. Chin, proceed." David pulled out another folder, this one thicker. "Your Honor, we have testimony from Mrs. Angela Martinez, the Werner family's neighbor, who on 3 occasions, March 15th, April 2nd, and May 20th of this year, observed Sophie Werner alone in the front yard crying, saying her mother had left and she couldn't get back inside the house. Mrs. Martinez had to call Mr. Werner at work to come home. We also have the dispatch records from those calls. I remembered those days with crystal clarity. The panic in Angela's voice when she'd called me. The terror I'd felt driving home at twice the speed limit, imagining Sophie hurt or taken or worse. Finding her sitting on the front steps, her face streaked with tears, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When I'd confronted Vera about it later, she'd said Sophie was being dramatic, that she'd only been gone 20 minutes to show a property. But Angela's testimony said otherwise, she'd been gone for over 2 hours each time. "Furthermore," David continued, "there's one more matter to address that speaks directly to Mrs. Werner's credibility and fitness as a parent." He paused and I felt my stomach clench. This was it. The nuclear option. Mr. Werner recently discovered, through DNA testing conducted at Accutest Laboratories, that Sophie Werner is not his biological daughter. The gasps in the courtroom sounded like a wave crashing against rocks. Vera's face went from white to crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Several people in the gallery, relatives, friends who'd come to support one side or the other, began whispering urgently. Judge Thornton banged her gavel 3 times before order was restored. "This raises serious questions not only about Mrs. Werner's fidelity but about her credibility regarding all aspects of this case," David said, his voice measured and professional. "If the court pleases, we'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Werner has knowingly misrepresented the paternity of this child for 6 years, collecting benefits, insurance coverage and financial support under false pretenses. We also have evidence identifying the biological father, a former colleague of Mrs. Werner's named Jason Hartley, who relocated to Atlanta 6 years ago and has no knowledge of Sophie's existence. Marcus Holloway had found Jason last week, tracked him down through employment records and social media. He'd even called him, recorded the conversation with his permission. Jason had been shocked, devastated to learn he had a daughter Vera had hidden from him. He'd asked if he could meet Sophie someday. I told Marcus to tell him maybe when she was older if she wanted to. But right now the information was leverage. Judge Thornton set down her pen with a sharp click. Mrs. Drummond, does your client have a response to these allegations? Patricia whispered frantically with Vera, whose composure had completely shattered. She was crying now, not the delicate, manipulative tears from earlier, but ugly, panicked sobbing that made her shoulders heave. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in black rivers, and she kept shaking her head, mouthing the word, "No," over and over. "Your Honor," Patricia finally said, her voice strained, "we request a recess to consult with our client." Judge Thornton checked her watch. 30 minutes. Use them wisely, counselor, because if we proceed with a full trial based on what I've heard today, I can tell you right now the outcome will not be favorable for your client. The warning in her voice was unmistakable. As the courtroom emptied, I stood in the hallway near the water fountain, my hands shaking as I filled a paper cup I didn't really want. David stood beside me checking his phone, giving me space. Then I felt a hand grab my arm, fingernails digging into my skin through my suit jacket. "Parker, please." It was Vera, her face a mess of tears and ruined makeup. Patricia tried to pull her back, but Vera shook her off. "Please, we can work this out. Don't do this to me. Think about the kids. Think about what this will do to them." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. The woman I'd married was gone, if she'd ever really existed. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of deception on a scale I couldn't have imagined. "Think about the kids?" I said quietly, pulling my arm free. "You left Sophie alone. You committed fraud. You tried to extort $200,000 from me while sleeping with a millionaire. You did this to yourself, Vera." "I made mistakes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I love those kids. You can't take them from me." "You're taking yourself from them," I said. "You made choices. Now you live with the consequences." David touched my shoulder. "Parker, we need to prepare for the settlement discussion." I nodded and turned away from Vera, leaving her crying in the hallway. 2 hours later we reconvened in a conference room. The late afternoon sun streamed through the blinds, creating striped shadows across the long table. On one side sat Vera and Patricia, on the other David and me. A court mediator sat at the head, her expression neutral but tired. She'd clearly seen this scenario play out 1,000 times before. Patricia had obviously explained reality to Vera during the recess. If this went to trial, Vera would likely lose primary custody, face potential fraud charges, and walk away with minimal support. The affair, the child abandonment, the paternity fraud, it was too much for even the most mother-friendly court to overlook. North Carolina had some fault considerations in divorce, and adultery definitely counted. The settlement was harsh but fair, David assured me, though fair felt like a relative term given everything. I would have primary custody of Emma and Marcus, my biological children. Vera would have supervised visitation twice weekly, Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons, at a neutral location until she could demonstrate stability. Sophie's situation was more complex legally. I was still her father of record on the birth certificate, and I insisted on remaining so. She was my daughter in every way that mattered, and I'd fight anyone who tried to say otherwise. I would have joint custody of Sophie with the option to pursue child support from Jason Hartley if needed, though I had no intention of doing that unless Sophie someday wanted a relationship with him. Vera would receive $3,500 monthly in alimony for exactly 2 years, enough to get on her feet, find a decent apartment, rebuild her career, but nowhere near the $200,000 annual child support she demanded. The number felt almost insulting compared to what she'd wanted, and I could see the humiliation burning in her eyes. Most importantly, there was a morality clause embedded in the custody agreement. If Vera introduced the children to any romantic partner within the next 2 years without court approval, or if there were any further incidents of neglect or abandonment, she would forfeit her custody rights entirely. One strike and she was out. The clause also specified that Damien Cross was explicitly prohibited from any contact with the children by name. "Sign it," Patricia told Vera quietly, sliding the papers across the table. "It's the best you're going to get. If we go to trial, you'll get far worse." Vera stared at the documents for a long moment, her hand hovering over them like she was afraid they might burn her. She looked at me one last time, searching my face for something. Mercy, maybe, or forgiveness. She wouldn't find either. Not today. Maybe not ever. She signed the papers with shaking hands, her signature barely legible. Mascara continued to streak her face, and she hadn't bothered to fix her appearance after the recess. She looked defeated, broken in a way that should have made me feel victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. As we gathered our things to leave, Vera remained seated, staring at the table. Patricia packed her briefcase efficiently, already moving on to her next case, her next client. This was just business to her. But for us, it was the end of everything we'd built together. Outside the courthouse, David put a hand on my shoulder as we stood on the steps. The evening air was cool, almost cold, and the sun was setting behind the city skyline, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. You did the right thing, Parker. Those kids need stability, and you're the one who can give it to them. Not her. I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. I'd won. The kids would be safe with me. But winning felt an awful lot like losing everything that had mattered for the past 12 years. Life after the divorce was strange in ways I hadn't anticipated. The house felt both emptier and fuller at the same time, like a living paradox. Emma, Marcus, and Sophie adjusted better than I'd feared. Kids are resilient in ways adults forget, able to bend without breaking where we shatter. I explained things to them age-appropriately, that mommy and daddy still loved them but couldn't be married anymore, that they'd spend most of their time with me but would still see their mother regularly. Sophie was the hardest conversation, sitting on her bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms, her 6-year-old eyes searching my face for reassurance. She was too young to understand paternity, DNA, or the complexities of adult deception. To her, I was dad. And I would always be dad. I made a decision early on that unless she asked directly when she was older, I would never tell her the truth about her biology. What mattered wasn't genetics or blood. What mattered was that I'd been there for every nightmare, every skinned knee, every bedtime story. Emma, at 13, was old enough to understand more than I wished she had to. She'd figured out that her mother had done something terrible, and she was angry at Vera for disrupting their lives, for the whispered conversations and the supervised visits. I did my best not to fuel that anger, to encourage her to maintain a relationship with her mother, but I could see the trust was broken in ways that might never fully heal. Marcus, my 9-year-old scientist, had asked me point-blank one night while we worked on his robot project, "Dad, did Mom cheat on you?" His directness had startled me, but I'd decided honesty was better than lies. "Yes, buddy. She did." He'd nodded solemnly and said, "That's not okay. She shouldn't have done that," with the moral clarity only a child possesses. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, on a rainy Tuesday evening after the kids were asleep, I got an unexpected email. The sender, Jason Hartley. Sophie's biological father. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. "Mr. Werner, my name is Jason Hartley. I recently learned about Sophie from an investigator. I don't want to disrupt her life or yours, but I'd like to know if there's a possibility of meeting her someday when she's ready. I'm not looking for custody or to replace you. I just want to know my daughter exists, to maybe be part of her life in whatever way works. Please respond if you're willing to discuss this." I stared at those words until my vision blurred. Part of me wanted to delete it, to protect the life we'd built from any further complications. But another part, the part that knew Sophie would someday have questions about where she came from, about why she had different eyes than her siblings, knew this was inevitable. I wrote back, "Jason, this is complicated. Sophie is 6 and believes I'm her father in every sense. I am her father in every sense that matters. But I won't lie to her forever. When she's old enough to understand, if she wants to meet you, I'll facilitate that. Until then, respect our boundaries." His response came within minutes, "I understand. Thank you for being the father I never had the chance to be. I'll wait." I closed the laptop and went upstairs to check on Sophie, who'd been coughing earlier. She was asleep, her rabbit tucked under her chin, peaceful and safe. I kissed her forehead gently. "Love you, Daddy," she mumbled without waking. "Love you too, sweetheart," I whispered. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Because that's what family does. If this shocked you, subscribe, like, comment, and share, because the next story is worse.